Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to talk about politics. So, how will we cope with both Putin and Trump tag teaming to get the far right elected in Europe? And not just the UK, but throughout Europe. Yesterday, I discussed the way the US administration has officially described liberal democracies in Europe as their enemy. Specifically, they consider any government which doesn't allow hate speech to run rampant and is not xenophobically against immigration of all forms is to be resisted by the US government. The latest today is that although Trump says he likes the current European leaders, he thinks Europe is a collection of decaying countries led by weak leaders. Let nobody ever accuse the orange one of consistency of thought. Of course, there is a sense in which he's right. Europe failed to prepare for Putin's Russia despite many years of red flags. They also failed to prepare for having the United States see itself as adversary, despite warnings there too. But that is not the weakness Trump is referring to. He thinks they should actually be more like him. He intends to directly interfere in European politics to help what are deemed suitable political groups gain power. This means that the United States is going to deploy whatever means it can to interfere in European elections. Trump has, of course, already interfered in elections this year by providing billions in support for President Milei and threatening to withhold further support if the Argentine midterms went against him. He interfered in the elections of a sovereign nation. And given that polling had suggested the midterms were likely to go against the government, Milei's wins suggest the interference had at least some effect. He also attempted to interfere in the judicial process of Brazil for a purely domestic matter. On that occasion, he failed. But it shows a level of intervention which is incredibly dangerous, and the barrel is now pointed at Europe. We're going to see a concerted effort by Trump and the US state to install the far right wherever they are competing in Europe. This will be Hungary first, of course, next year. Trump is a huge admirer of Viktor Orban, but Orban looks like his time has run out. Government polling tells one story, but independent polling in Hungary indicates that there would likely be a change of government next year. That being said, election campaigns can swing dramatically. The reality is most voters don't really pay much attention to politics much of the time, other than surface level at best. People don't really like politics. Only when the election is upon them do they start to think about it seriously. Although I say that, we also know that voting for many people is more about vibes than serious thinking. Many people spend more time deciding which wallpaper to get than which government to vote for. So a concerted effort by both Russia and the United States, both of whom have experience interfering in the politics of other countries, although America has tended not to exercise those skills in Europe, we could be in serious trouble. If Orban wins again, that will be an ominous sign for other countries, because Hungary is like ready to get rid of him now. France in 2027, UK in 2029. And these are just the countries where the risk is very high, even without Trump's intervention. You know, with Trump's intervention and everything else over time, the plan is to push far-right governments everywhere. The alignment of privately owned press, broadcast media, social media, the Russian propaganda machine, and now the United States resources could be too much to resist, especially as those who would defend liberal democracy are far too splintered to unite in opposition to these moves. This is a very serious threat facing us right now. Several EU leaders, most notably Alberto Costa for the EU, have told Trump to back off. But we may need more than defiant warnings. This isn't even an issue of left and right, as many people view political battles. This is socially progressive versus xenophobic authoritarianism. Common trade links making the whole greater than the sum of its parts versus Europe being splintered and picked off one by the USA, Russia and China. It is not just the UK where the vote is dangerously fragmented in the face of such a threat. It's like that as standard throughout most of Europe. And we cannot sit on our laurels here. We need to understand how Trump is supporting the far right and have a counter for every single one. Specifically, we need our governments to do that. We must understand that they have more resources. They are more practiced at these propaganda exercises. So we will need to be smarter and more organised. Yes, I know. But it's either that or roll over to another far-right takeover of Europe. I mostly missed the last one. I sort of just caught the tail end of Czechoslovakia. I don't really fancy seeing the history rerun, if I'm honest. And the play will be simple. Get the far right into power in major European nations at the same time then poisoned the EU from the inside, rendering it useless against both Russian and American aggression. Trump is not being coy about this. When J.D. Vance gave us fair warning in February at the Munich speech, some might have thought he was just shooting his mouth off. Well, now the policy is in black and white. It's been published by the White House. It's official. The USA is to actively promote regime change where liberal governments currently exist and prop up regimes against the public will if necessary where the far right is already in power. The good news is that Europe has been preparing for this in a way. Not necessarily facing this level of aggression from the US government, but the Russian state and American social media giants have been posing a threat for a while, so countermeasures have been worked on. The first line of defence targets the main battlefield, the internet. For years, US-based big tech platforms have operated like a sort of Wild West. Their algorithms amplifying harmful content, little to no accountability. Europe's answer has been two pieces of legislation, the Digital Services Act, DSA, and the Digital Markets Act, DMA. The DSA forces platforms to police their content and be transparent about their algorithms. The DMA is designed to break up monopolistic power of tech giants. For serious breaches, the DSA can carry a fine of up to 6% of a company's global annual turnover. The DMA can go up to 10% or even 20% for repeat offenders, which could run into billions. Right now, there seems to be a game of cat and mouse going on between the EU regulation and Trump's bullying. But if the threat escalates, these laws could be used to really go after the tech giants. The question is, will the EU use them on full power? And if any tech giants try to challenge rulings, will they do what Brazil did and just go, well, we'll just shut the platforms off until you behave then? Will we be tough or timid? I say we. Unfortunately, it breaks my heart. The UK is not part of this. We're screwed. But will the EU be tough or timid in the face of this concerted threat? Now, although the EU have come to some arrangement with Trump on tariffs, they do still have tools in their locker if they decide the orange one needs a bit of a boop on the snoot to get him to back off. The ultimate tool in this fight is the Anti-Coercion Instrument, or ACI. Came into force a couple of years ago, described by experts as a trade bazooka. I had talked about it earlier this year when we thought the EU might threaten it. The ACI gives the EU broad powers to retaliate against economic bullying. It would allow Brussels to respond with a wide range of countermeasures, from restricting access to the EU's massive public procurement market to imposing export controls. The ACI has never actually had to be used yet, but it just sits there like a loaded weapon on the negotiating table. It's designed as a deterrent to make an adversary think twice. Like I say, the only reason I think it wasn't used in the face of Trump's tariffs is a trade-off for US security support for Ukraine. But if Trump is intending to destroy European security, as his policy document indicates, then there's nothing to stop that bazooka coming out now. Back in 2022, Ursula von der Leyen, Commission President, announced a defence of democracy, she called it, a package to protect the EU from covert foreign influence. The plan has been evolving since on several key pillars, really. The first is safeguarding the information space by proactively exposing disinformation narratives before they go viral. The second is strengthening democratic institutions, which includes tightening the rules on financing for European political parties, a measure that was updated last year to increase transparency, make it harder for foreign money to secretly influence campaigns. The third pillar is boosting citizen engagement and resilience against propaganda. Now, as I said, this was done with Russia in mind, but it could easily be used against the United States now. A key part of this is improving how EU member states share intelligence and coordinate their responses to hybrid threats and foreign interference. It's a recognition that defending against modern propaganda requires a unified pan-European effort, a collective immune system for European democracy. Now, the final device isn't a weapon to be used, but it is a reality that underpins the global financial system. It's the deep financial interdependence between Europe and the United States, particularly through the holding of US government debt. Now, to be clear, the idea of a coordinated sell-off of US treasuries, that is not an official policy. Doing that would be bad for everyone. However, the fact remains that foreign investors collectively hold about a quarter of all US government debt. Now, the largest holders are, of course, countries like Japan and China, but European nations are also major investors. Now, this is not necessarily leverage to be brandished in the same way as the trade bazooka, but it is a stark reminder of the extreme stakes involved. In a scenario where an administration were to take really drastic measures to threaten Europe's core security, the economic calculus could shift. The fact of the matter is, the greater the threat you face, the more you are willing to risk in defence. I mean, that's just basic survival instinct. You wouldn't jump off a cliff for a laugh, but you might if you were being chased by ravenous wolves and had no other recourse. Chance of death is better than certain death, right? We know that Trump chickened out when his moves on trade backfired in the markets. So although Europe is in a bad situation, it doesn't mean there's nothing to hit back with, for the EU anyway. But they will need to be resolved, and they'll need to take this seriously. There's no point waiting until the strategy is working, because every time an EU country elects a batshit government, the EU's capabilities will just weaken from internal sabotage. They have to be proactive now. Europe has been weak in that it has been too slow to recognise obvious red flags and threats over the years. Will leaders now recognise the existential threat to their way of life and start being more aggressive? Is Europe going to fight back? What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Please subscribe to the channel for more content. Click the bell notification icon so you know when new videos are coming out. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.